Yes, now. Bless now. Don't forget the rest now. Des Rocksteady, King of the Pit TV. Class is in session. We're going to continue on our journey. This is going to be a fun one now, people. This is going to be a really good one. We're going into the other heavy metal genres that have emerged 80s, 90s, and 2000s. We're on a process of learning the history of heavy metal. As always, if you got anything to dispute, anything to commentate on, anything to argue with, or to agree with, leave a comment. Let's talk. So, this one's going to be a good one because we're going to have a look into where metal divided and shot off. Many subgenres of heavy metal developed outside of the commercial mainstream during the 1980s, such as crossover thrash. Crossover thrash is very niche, very niche. Several attempts have been made to map the complex world of underground metal, most notably by the editors of AllMusic as well as the critic Gary Sharp-Young. Sharp-Young's multi-volume metal encyclopedia separates the underground into 5 major categories: thrash metal, death metal, black metal, power metal, and the related subgenres of doom and gothic metal. Interesting. What do you think to that? Does that make sense? 5 major categories? And is heavy metal an umbrella of them all, I would assume? Right? In 1990, a review in Rolling Stone suggested retiring the term heavy metal as the genre was ridiculously vague. The article stated that the term only fueled misperceptions of rock and roll bigots who still assumed that 5 bands as different as Rat, Extreme, Anthrax, Danzig, and Mother Love Bone sound the same. I think the term heavy metal is good because I have a particular concept of what is heavy metal in music. You know what I mean? I think heavy metal is definitely a particular sound, personally. So where are we going from here? Let's have a look. We got thrash metal. Thrash metal, and we're going to look at like the deep depth of these genres in due time, but we're sticking with heavy metal for the moment. So thrash metal emerged in the early 1980s under the influence of hardcore punk. So you metalheads out there, there's a lot of elitist metalheads out there who don't know their roots as far as hardcore punk is concerned, and will hate on anybody who's into hardcore because no karate in the pit, people, right? Bruh, thrash metal is very punk by nature. So, under the influence of hardcore punk and the new wave of British heavy metal, particularly songs in the revved up style known as speed metal, the movement began in the United States, with Bay Area thrash metal being the leading scene. The sound developed by thrash groups was faster and more aggressive than that of the original metal bands and their glam metal successors. Low register guitar riffs are typically overlaid with shredding leads. Lyrics often express nihilistic views or deal with social issues using visceral, gory language. Thrash has been described as a form of urban blight music and a pale-faced cousin of rap. That's interesting, of a pale-faced cousin of rap music. I disagree. I completely disagree. The likeness I can find is maybe as far as crossover is concerned. You know, the way a lyricist can pepper their words over the instrumental. You know what I mean? I see near to no crossover, you know what I mean, to rap music. The subgenre was popularised by the big four of thrash: Metallica, Anthrax, Megadeth, and Slayer. 3 German bands, Creator, Sodom, and Destruction, played a central role in bringing the style to Europe. I've only heard one Destruction record, and they sounded sick, to be honest with you. Like, the technicality of that band blew me away when I listened to that band. Others, including the San Fran Bay Area's Testament and Exodus, New Jersey's Overkill, and Brazil's Sepultura and Sarcophago, if that's how you pronounce them, also had a significant impact. Although thrash metal began as an underground movement and remained largely that for almost a decade, the leading bands of the scene began to reach a larger audience. Metallica brought the sound into the top 40 of the Billboard album charts in 1986 with Master of Puppets, the genre's first platinum record. 2 years later, the band's album And Justice for All hit number 6, while Megadeth and Anthrax also had top 40 records in the American charts. Though less commercially successful than the rest of the Big Four, Slayer released one of the genre's definitive records, Rain in Blood. Rain in Blood was credited for incorporating heavier guitar timbres, and it included explicit depictions of death, suffering, violence, and a cult into thrash metal's lyricism. Slayer attracted a following among far-right skinheads, and accusations of promoting violence and Nazi themes have dogged the band. Even though Slayer did not receive substantial media exposure, their music played a key role in the development of extreme metal. I don't hear about that. That's the first time I've heard about that. Obviously, lyrically, there is, reference to the Holocaust, and image-wise, some may deem it controversial, imagery used in relation to Nazi Germany and so on and so forth. But I've never heard a reference of Slayer attracting far-right skinheads. I mean, it's no surprise you might catch a couple of people at the show, but as far as metal in a general, you know what I mean? It's not strange you find a couple of people with extreme political views at metal events. The more niche and more extreme the style of music, it tends to be more common, especially in like black metal and stuff like that. Punk adjacent metal, you'll find less of that because it's more left leaning. But you know what I mean? Far right skinheads attracted to, deathly music is more common than it would seem. A lot of people are outspoken about it, but I spent a minute in metal. You know what I mean? I'm part of a metal scene in England, so it's very white. It's a very white community. You know what I mean? So you do catch a few people who are, might have quite a dodgy way of thinking when it comes to it. Though less commercially successful than the rest of the Big Four, I have read that before. In the early 1990s, bands that got their start in thrash metal achieved breakout success, challenging and redefining the metal mainstream. Metallica's self-titled 91 album topped the Billboard chart as the band established an international following. Megadeth's Countdown to Extinction in 92 debuted at number 2. Anthrax and Slayer cracked the top 10, and albums by regional bands such as Testament and Sepultura entered the top 100. Right, so next we're gonna delve into death metal, and I think we'll leave black metal, power metal, and doom metal for the next video. We'll see how much info we can get out of this. It's only a paragraph. So death metal. Thrash metal soon began to evolve and split into more extreme metal genres. Slayer's music was directly responsible for the rise of death metal, according to MTV News, which they don't really get credit for, They don't get credit for Slayer and, their relation to death metal and the soundscape of death metal. The new wave of British heavy metal band Venom was also an important progenitor. The death metal movement in both North America and Europe adopted and emphasised the elements of blasphemy and diabolism employed by such acts. Florida's Death, San Francisco Bay Area's Possessed, and Ohio's Necrophagia are recognized as seminal bands in the style. All three have been credited with inspiring the subgenre's name. Possessed in particular did so via their 1984 demo, Death Metal. I mean, they coined it on the title of their demo. And their song Death Metal, which came from their 85 debut album, Seven Churches, which we've listened to on this channel. In the late 80s and early 90s, Swedish death metal became notable and melodic forms of death metal were created. Death metal utilises the speed and aggression of both thrash and hardcore. Interesting. We do find a lot of thrash metal in the early death metal sound, which, has its roots in punk, but I think death metal is quite far at this point from the sounds of hardcore. To this day, you know what I mean? There's not too much crossover. As far as communities, you might have like hardcore kids playing in death metal bands and having like death metal, like mosh metal bands and so forth. But death metal and hardcore punk, there's limited crossover, right? Really limited crossover. But you know what I mean? This is why I'm saying disagree if you want, people, because this is just Wikipedia here. It's my opinion versus what supposedly might be factual information. You tell me. Death metal utilises the speed and aggression of both thrash and hardcore, fused with lyrics preoccupied with Z-grade slasher movie violence and Satanism. Death metal vocals are typically bleak, involving guttural death growls, high-pitched screaming, the death rasp, and other uncommon techniques. I've never heard of anybody refer to the death rasp vocal before. Complementing the deep, aggressive vocal style are down-tuned, heavily distorted guitars and extremely fast percussion, often with rapid double bass drumming and wall of sound style blast beats. Frequent tempo and time signature changes and syncopation are also typical. Death metal, like thrash metal, generally rejects the theatrics of earlier metal styles, opting instead for an everyday look of ripped jeans and plain leather jackets. One major exception to this rule was Deicide's Glenn Benton, who branded an inverted cross on his forehead and wore armour on stage. I've never seen him wearing armour, that's pretty cool. Well, I had a mate who used to wear chainmail, he's proper black metalhead, man. He used to, on his day-to-day, wear chainmail, man. Never met anybody else in my entire life like that. He was an alright dude, to be fair with you. Morbid Angel adopted neo-fascist imagery. Those two bands, along with Death... what's neo-fascist? A post-World War II far-right ideology that includes significant elements of fascism. Neo-fascism usually includes ultranationalism, racial supremacy, populism, authoritarianism, nativism, xenophobia, and anti-immigration sentiment, as well as opposition to liberal democracy, right? These two bands, along with Death and the Obituary, were leaders of the major death metal scene that emerged in Florida in the mid-1980s. In the UK, the related style of grindcore, led by bands such as Napalm Death and Extreme Noise Terror, emerged from the anarcho-punk movement. Extreme Noise Terror is sick. Extreme Noise Terror, really good. I got family who are into anarcho-punk, man. And I never delved into them too much, but there's some absolutely spot-on acts with great approaches to, the vocal element of bands. I like anarcho-punk. I just don't know too much of it at this moment in time. Right, I'll see you on the flip side. We're going to look into black metal, power metal, and doom metal. All right, so hold on tight.